Hello, my name is Rahmah from the Faculty of Humanities, University of Indonesia. And today I'm going to present to you my research titled Intellectual Property Theory Incoherence in Cyberspace. First off, the problem. The phenomenon of the global changes through the information and communication technology development creates significant benefits for the world. However, it also destroys the current social system that has been implemented, namely the intellectual property system. Thus, I want to find out, in this significant change, is the concept of intellectual property still relevant in its theoretical claims? And does the conceptual claim of intellectual property still fulfill proprietary and consequentialist claims in the context of the development of information and communication technology? The methodology. First, I do an in-depth reading of the proprietary and consequentialist theoretical justification of intellectual property and then evaluate its claims. Further, I also do an in-depth reading of the phenomenon of network society by Manuel Castells and Van Dijk, as well as its logical empirical implications. And thus, I will do a critical analysis and elaboration colliding intellectual property theory in the paradigm of the network society. Ultimately, this article will show the practical implication of the irrelevance of the concept of intellectual property in the new economy of a network society. Now, let's talk about intellectual property. Intellectual property is a claim of ownership over immaterial objects. These immaterial objects include non-physical abstract entities that are usually the result of intellectual, creative, and cultural creations. The main characteristic of immaterial objects in the scope of intellectual property is their non-exclusion, means that they can exist in many places at once and are not diminished by their use. In intellectual property, the existence of immaterial objects is manipulated to create artificial scarcity to maintain the property system. The justification of intellectual property is primarily seen as proprietary and consequentialist. Proprietary justification sees intellectual property as a right that must be protected from creators, while consequentialist justification sees intellectual property as a tool that guarantees global innovation. Much of the proprietary justification of intellectual property is based on John Locke's labor theory, which later received developments and revisions from Nozick and Munzer, while the consequentialist justification is much based on utilitarian. When drawn further, the concept of intellectual property implies the same mechanism between the relations of ownership of immaterial objects and material objects. In today's context, the development of communication and information technology has fundamentally changed the global world and has led to what is known as a network society. According to Castell, the network society is a new society with a social structure based on networks in information technology and communication based on microelectronics. According to Van Dijk, a network society is a social formation with networking media as the main infrastructure for organizing all levels, namely through information exchange and processing. The network itself is an organizational mode consisting of interconnectedness between nodes of producing order in complex systems. Any network approach emphasizes the importance of the relationship between units rather than the unit themselves. These relationships are not only limited to connectedness, but have built an interactive ecosystems. The interactive relationships built in the network give rise to global digital ecosystems that moves independently. It moves independently because of its independent nature beyond the centralized media systems. This interactive ecosystems occurs in networks that regulate the relationships within and between levels of social reality units. Therefore, cyberspace has characteristics of hypertext, decentralized, interactive, and without regional border. This research finds that the proprietary claims cannot be fulfilled by intellectual property because the existence of cyberspace not only opens distribution access for immaterial objects, but also becomes an interactive space for innovation itself. And then, claiming immaterial objects as property by taking them from the common by inhibiting or closing their access creates a continuous erosion of the intellectual common itself. The consequentialist also true reductionist in claiming incentives will ensure global development. If incentives are indeed the main reason for the application of IP, then privatization should not be the main emphasis. And finally, global intellectual property system widens global disparities, both in access to information and in the direction of global innovation. The conclusion is the proprietary and consequentialist justification of intellectual property cannot fulfill its claim when collided with cyberspace as a social common. That's because intellectual property system requires a distinction between processes of publication, distribution, and cultural circulation. Interactivity in cyberspace has eliminated this distinction. However, apart from the problems, intellectual property still has its practical role in the economic system of capitalism, which fundamentally still inherits the old rules. But although it has practical roles, it no longer operates on the principle of proprietary and consequentialist justification.